Let me tell you something strange about the digital world we live in today. We exist in an era where visibility has become a currency, where people announce their meals, their moods, their milestones, even their pain disguised with perfect lighting. Every moment seems to come with an audience. Every thought feels like it requires a performance. And yet, some people remain almost completely unseen. They move silently through timelines, reading everything, posting nothing. They watch the chaos, the trends, the arguments, but stay tucked in the shadows, unreachable, unreadable, untouched. You might know someone like that. You might be someone like that. And the question everyone secretly asks is the same. Why? Why would someone choose to stay invisible in a world where everyone else is shouting their existence into the void? People assume it's shyness or disinterest or privacy, but there's a deeper psychology here. A quiet, deliberate choice that speaks volumes about identity, self-protection, power, and the human need to stay hidden in a culture obsessed with being seen. It rarely happens all at once, the decision to stay hidden. It begins quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the small moments where visibility starts to feel unsafe. Maybe it was the first time someone mocked a post they put effort into. Maybe it was the silence after they shared something vulnerable. Maybe it was the way people twisted their words, or how a private feeling suddenly became public property. Or maybe it was none of that. Maybe it was simply the realization that eyes, so many eyes, were watching, judging, comparing, assuming. So they pulled back. Just a little at first. They posted less, shared less, opened up less. They learned to become observers instead of performers. They watched others curate themselves, highlight reels dressed as reality, and something inside them shifted. A voice whispered, "You don't have to play this game." And slowly, they slipped into the background, not out of weakness, not out of fear, but out of a quiet instinct for self-preservation. They didn't disappear. They simply stepped behind the curtain into a space where they could breathe without being seen. A space where their inner world no longer needed an audience. Psychologists have a word for this retreat, for the instinct to stay unseen in environments that demand constant visibility. It's called self-protective invisibility. It's a coping response rooted in autonomy, a way the mind shields itself from the emotional cost of being perceived too much, too often. This isn't just privacy, the mind says. This is safety. Because being visible online doesn't just mean being seen. It means being interpreted, evaluated, categorized, and for some people, that constant exposure feels like a threat to their authenticity, their stability, their sense of self. Self-protective invisibility emerges when someone realizes that being watched changes their behavior, their tone, their choices, their identity. So they choose a different path, a quieter one where they can exist without performing, feel without announcing, observe without being pulled into the digital spotlight. This isn't avoidance, it's awareness, a recognition that not everyone is meant to live publicly, that some minds thrive best in spaces untouched by comparison, validation, or the hunger for digital applause. It's the psychology of staying undercover, not to hide who they are, but to protect who they are from the world's unending gaze. Spending years undercover on social media begins to shape a person from the inside out. They start noticing things others miss, micro expressions in photos, the tone hidden between captions, the quiet desperation inside curated joy. They develop a sensitivity not to content but to the psychology behind it, and gradually something shifts in their worldview. They begin to see how much of the online world runs on performance, how moments are staged, how emotions are edited, how identity becomes a product to be marketed, managed, maintained, and in that realization, they feel an invisible divide forming inside them. Part of them longs to participate, to belong, to be witnessed, to be understood the way others seem to be. But another part, the quieter, older, more instinctive part, pulls them back each time they get close, because they know the cost. Visibility requires performance. Performance demands constancy. Constancy becomes a cage, so they choose depth instead. They choose inwardness. They choose a kind of emotional privacy that the digital world rarely honors. Their mind becomes their refuge. Their silence becomes their language, and their presence becomes something felt, not broadcasted. This internal world grows rich, a landscape of thoughts, reflections, emotions they no longer feel pressured to translate into something presentable. They don't envy the loud ones. They don't resent the visible ones. They simply move differently, with intention, with privacy, with a softness that doesn't need witnesses. This is where the undercover identity fully settles into their bones, not as a mask, but as a home. But beneath that calm, beneath that intentional quiet, there is a grief they almost never name, a grief that comes from being unseen in a world where visibility has become currency. They watch people receive support, attention, affection, not because they're deeper or kinder or wiser, but because they're louder, more present, more visible, and a small ache forms inside them. Not jealousy, not envy, something softer, something sadder, a loneliness that whispers, if people don't see you, how will they ever know you? It's the ache of having so much within them, ideas, emotions, depth, yet feeling like the world only values what is displayed, not what is lived. So they carry this quiet contradiction. The desire to be known and the instinct to stay hidden, the longing to be understood and the fear of being misunderstood, the wish to share and the exhaustion of being perceived. This is the grief of the undercover presence, the ache of holding a universe inside you that the world will never witness because the price of visibility still feels far too high. Psychologists have a name for the quiet detachment that undercover social media users develop over time: self-protective distancing. It's not avoidance. It's not shyness. It's a boundary formed by the nervous system after repeated exposure to digital environments that feel overwhelming, intrusive, or performative. Studies show that people who stay undercover online often possess traits associated with high sensitivity, introspective thinking, strong internal locus of control, lower need for external validation. They don't turn inward because they're empty. They turn inward because that is where they feel most real. And there's something else at play here, a concept known as identity preservation. When life becomes content, identity becomes fragmented. But those who stay hidden are unconsciously protecting the cohesion of their inner world. They're safeguarding their authenticity from algorithms that reward exaggeration, from audiences that misinterpret nuance, from a culture that confuses visibility with value. Their silence is not a lack of identity, it's a refusal to dilute it. And beneath it all lies a simple truth. They are not trying to be seen by everyone. They are trying to remain true to themselves. As they grow older, this undercover way of existing doesn't stay confined to social media. It begins to shape the rest of their life. They become the person who listens more than they speak, who observes before engaging, who notices the fine print of human behavior while everyone else is distracted by the headlines. In relationships, they reveal themselves slowly, not out of fear, but out of respect for the intimacy they hold sacred. They don't rush connection. They don't broadcast emotions for applause. They share themselves in increments, in chosen moments with chosen people. To some, this looks mysterious. To others, aloof. But the truth is simpler. They value genuine presence over digital performance. At work, they often become the quiet thinkers, the strategists, the observers, the ones who see patterns long before others recognize them. And in friendships, they are steady. Not loud, not always visible, but deeply present in ways that don't require documentation. This undercover identity becomes a blueprint, a way of moving through adulthood with intentional boundaries and quiet integrity. They may not be the loudest voice in the room, but they are often the voice people seek in their moments of truth. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the undercover person realizes something profound. They were never hiding. They were simply protecting what was real. It usually happens in a small, unremarkable moment, scrolling through a feed filled with performances, watching people argue with strangers, seeing someone announce a truth that feels rehearsed more than lived. Something inside them softens, then sharpens. They realize that their silence has always been a form of discernment, a refusal to turn their identity into a spectacle, a quiet rebellion against a world that confuses noise with relevance. And the recognition lands. This isn't about fear. This is about freedom. They begin to see the pattern. How much energy they saved, how much clarity they kept, how much authenticity they preserved by not offering every piece of themselves to the crowd. The turning point is not dramatic, no declarations, no announcements, just a subtle shift inward, a realization that they don't need to be witnessed to be whole. And for the first time, they genuinely understand. Their invisibility was never absence. It was agency. This is where the script softens, because once they recognize the truth of who they are, another realization follows. Gentle, unexpected, almost tender. There was never anything wrong with them. They were not antisocial. They were not insecure. They were not detached. They were protecting the parts of themselves that the world is often careless with. The reframe doesn't come with triumph. It comes with compassion, a deep breath, a loosening of the shoulders, a softening in the chest. They begin to see their quietness not as a flaw, but as a form of inner intelligence. Their reluctance to post was not a deficiency. It was a boundary, a way of saying, my life belongs to me before it belongs to anyone else. Their privacy was not a hole to fill, it was a home to return to. Their selective presence was not distance, it was discernment. And slowly, they begin to stop apologizing for the space they keep sacred. They understand that kindness does not require exposure, that connection does not require performance, that meaning does not require an audience. The reframe is simple but transformative. They were never hiding from the world. They were preserving themselves within it. Healing begins quietly for the undercover soul, not with a dramatic decision, not with a sudden burst of confidence, but with a subtle internal shift, a willingness to honor their own rhythm instead of betraying it. It starts when they stop forcing themselves to show up in places that drain them, when they choose presence over visibility, when they let themselves exist without asking the world to confirm it. They begin to allow moments to belong to them again, fully, intimately, without an audience. A walk becomes a walk, not a photo opportunity. A thought becomes a thought, not a caption waiting to be crafted. A joy becomes theirs alone, not content to be consumed. This isn't withdrawal, this isn't resistance. It's a return, a slow homecoming to the parts of themselves that were overshadowed by the demand for display. They begin to trust their inner world again, their intuition, their ability to know themselves without needing feedback loops of approval. Healing here is not a journey forward, but a sinking deeper into authenticity, into solitude, into the quiet truth of who they are. And they realize that what they once mistook for emptiness was actually spaciousness, room to breathe, room to feel, room to simply be. In the end, something beautiful happens. The person who stayed undercover is no longer hiding. They are simply living on their own terms, at their own pace, with their own sense of meaning. They no longer measure life by what can be seen. They no longer trade intimacy for visibility. They no longer perform the small poem of their existence for an audience that forgets quickly. Instead, they move through the world with a quiet steadiness, a confidence that does not need to be announced to be real, and something shifts around them. people begin to sense the depth that comes from someone who belongs to themselves, the kind of presence that cannot be manufactured or filtered or edited, the kind of presence that grows in silence and blooms unseen. So if you've ever felt strange for staying hidden, for choosing observation over exposure, for letting your story unfold in private, know this: you are not disappearing. You are deepening. And in a world obsessed with being watched, your quiet existence is not a flaw. It is a form of freedom, a reminder that you are allowed to remain whole even when you remain unseen.